Hi guys, this next book review is a book of philosophy. A slightly more technical review, just as a warning. It's by the eminent American philosopher Hilary Putnam, and it's called The Collapse of the Fact-Value Dichotomy and Other Essays, referring, of course, to David Hume's assertion that you can't get an ought from an is. That's what he's talking about. You can't take facts and derive moral precepts from them. This is a collection of essays, and but they all some of them talk about different subjects. They don't all have to do about the fact-value dichotomy. The first essay establishes that the fact-value distinction, like I said, a later incarnation of Hume's "you can't derive an is from an ought" thesis, rests on the dubious positivist definition of fact that derives from sense impression. Of course, I'm giving you Putnam's interpretation, not my own opinions here. In the second essay, Putnam explains that the values that science assumes aren't necessarily moral or ethical ones, but epistemic ones, that is, having to do with knowledge. Epistemic values like coherence and simplicity are assumed in the scientific pursuit, yet science continues to be thought of as wholly objective. John Mackey argued that words like cruel and just were simply words that described natural facts, instead of realizing that they cannot be used intelligibly without employing some kind of evaluative judgment. The third essay transposes this debate into the world of classical economic theory. The same debate found itself transposed into the field of economics, ensconced within the framework of a Benthamist moral calculus, but were removed from the empiricist is-ought distinction, which was, of course, later the work of the positivist philosophers. Amartya Sen's project, Amartya Sen, the well-known economist, is to reintroduce ethical concepts and norms once so lauded by the likes of Adam Smith, but long since having been forgotten, back into the discourse of classical economics without losing any of its original rigor. Sen realizes that people are motivated by non-self-interested motives. At least some of those motives are non-self-interested, in addition to self-interested ones. In its place, Sen posits a capabilities approach, which emphasizes a plurality of human rights, freedoms, and goals, instead of the what he would consider the poverty of utilitarian ethical monism. Throughout the three lectures, Putnam carefully picks apart one of the most enduring shibboleths of modern philosophy. Like Rorty, with whom he shares many intellectual affinities, Putnam has an explicit, self-conscious relationship with the analytical tradition. In fact, of course, many American pragmatists do. I'm not terribly familiar with Putnam's relationship with pragmatism. If it is, it's probably a complicated one. Unlike Rorty, however, he hasn't wholly eschewed that tradition, that is, of analytical philosophy. While he disagrees with many of its conclusions, he's able to use some of its assumptions, and he's also able to break outside of the box of what can be perceived as sort of a morally bankrupt positivism. The last part of the book contains 5 essays of sort of tangentially related to the 3 major essays. On the rationality of preferences is one of the essays included in the collection, but not one of the 3 original lectures. And it's Putnam's answer to an interlocutor who made a curious criticism of a paper that he presented one time. Putnam's presentation considered a person who had 2 choices before them, A and B, neither of which the chooser preferred. So there was no preference in the chooser, but you still have these two choices, A and B. Would it matter, Putnam asks, if instead of the chooser making the decision simply, if he simply tosses a coin or gets a random person to make the decision for him? After all, they don't have a preference, right? So would this matter? Most classically trained economists would assert that it didn't matter who makes the decision. In fact, that's what the interlocutor pointed out. However, Putnam's response is a really brilliant response, defending the idea that even though one might not prefer A over B or B over A, that the ability to choose one's own option engenders a kind of dignity of the self, which economists have heretofore ignored. So this book is really a series of essays which looks at, well, of course, the philosophical problems of the is-ought, how those rub up against one another, but also looks at economics, those economic implications beyond just sort of the rational choice theory, which we've all been weaned on as far as economics goes. Sort of brings in other concepts like the capabilities approach that I mentioned by Sin, which Sin is largely responsible for, and this kind of dignity of the self, which isn't this positivist concept that can be put under a microscope and you can get truth values from, but we still see it as very important in everyday economic interactions. An interesting series of lectures by Hilary Putnam, who's a guy who's always changing his mind about almost everything, but manages to put something pretty coherent together here. The Collapse of the Fact-Value Dichotomy, and Other Essays by Hilary Putnam.